This has never been done before. A full, uncensored conversation between two forensic interviewers. In part 1, we explored the tactics, the protocols, how to take control in high-stake interviews. But what about staying human?
In essence, you did what a lot of people don't do, is you checked your ego at the door. You bring that ego into the room, people are going to feel it.
This episode goes deeper, about fear, about reflection, and the price of getting it wrong.
Well, I can tell you some very long flights and some very long drives, because I would sit there and I would review in infinite detail. And so I was constantly evaluating my mistakes and then beating myself up, sometimes for too long, over mistakes that I had made.
Sometimes the most dangerous moment is when you think you are in the clear. Episode 2 is now live. This is the part of the expertise that no one shows you. So let's go behind the mask. Watch now, subscribe, and reflect.
I view interviewing as very simple. It's effective communication with a purpose. I don't complicate it at all. It's really very simple. We are going to talk, and we're going to go back and forth, and there's a purpose. But it has to be effective. We cannot have an ineffective conversation, an ineffective interview. And communication needs to take place that is precise.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's what is your role? And sometimes I'm amazed at how often we forget. You have two police officers in the interview room and they forget what their role is. Who's in charge? Who's who's going to pursue the facts and who's going to pursue the story?
Yeah, I also like to perceive it as what's your ownership role in the conversation? You at the moment are also reading just a little few fragments for my future book as well. And there's also a story in where I thought I controlled the situation, but the suspect was actually very psychotic. And
Yep.
I thought, okay, I can handle this, right? So at that point, I thought, okay, this is going to be a good conversation. But afterwards, reflecting, it was all about: do I have enough knowledge? Can I actually handle this situation? Do I know how to close the interview in the correct way, taking care of his health as well?
Yeah.
And those are the things I also like to reflect on when I interview. Do you take enough ownership? Or do you let your ego decide how far you will let the interview go?
Yeah.
So these actually are very important points for me also
Yeah.
to talk about, actually.
Yeah. Well, I know that from you, because after every interview, you always you stop to analyze it. Very few people do that. You stop to analyze it. Was I effective? Should I have said this? What would have worked better? So you were very introspective, and I think that's what made you a great interviewer, is that you took time to say, okay, next time I'm not going to say anything at this point. And so you learn from that. In essence, you did what a lot of people don't do, is you checked your ego at the door. You bring that ego into the room, people are going to feel it. Oh, she just wants to be heard. She wants to be the know-it-all. She wants to, she just wants a confession. She doesn't want to know what happened. And the bad guys know it. They feel it. They sense it. Or if there's two of you, they feel there's tension between between you two. And and that's why, to a certain extent, to a great extent, most of the interviews that I did by myself, because I didn't have to worry about another actor there or another agent and what they might do. obviously it puts more work on you.
It can also bring dilemmas, right? So in the cases I talked with you also before, is you don't want to undermine your colleague in the conversation. So now you have to deal with two people in the room. And that can be very interesting as well. And like we talked about before,
Yeah.
is what I like to say is half of the information that you read of others is also actually about you. So
Mm.
there's a lot of cognitive load on the suspect or whoever you are interviewing or having a conversation with, because now you have to take away the noise of three people in the room. Also considering all the dilemmas of undermining, etc. So on the other hand, there are also a lot of professionals who say, who is going to keep you as an interviewer in check if you are doing the interview by yourself or alone?
Yeah.
How can you reflect afterwards? Because not many, like you say, not everyone can reflect on themselves. Sometimes you also need someone else to ask questions about the how and the why, etc. So how did you do that then?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you some very long flights and some very long drives because, I would sit there and I would review in infinite detail what was said, what was the behavior, what was mentioned, what was the behavior, and then, evaluating myself, constantly evaluating myself. I would say the after interview, I would spend maybe twice as long going through that. Should I have said that at that point? Should I have used another word? For instance, this came up a lot where I mistakenly used words the prosecutor was interested in. Like before I went to do an interview, he would say, "Well, we need evidence of this and that."
Mm.
Did I stupidly during the interview say, "Well, is there any evidence of you entering this hotel or saying, instead of, catching myself, no, you used the right word. You said, well, did anybody see you there? Did you make any phone calls? Did
Yeah.
is there a way to?" And so I was constantly evaluating my mistakes and then beating myself up, sometimes for too long over mistakes that I had made, some that had to do with timing, where I felt like, oh, this could have waited to another interview or later in the interview, but I brought it up too soon. And then, I noticed that that made him tense. Now I have to de-escalate and then deal with that. So, yeah, there are benefits and there are deficits to working alone. But in the field that I was in, which was in counterintelligence, sometimes you couldn't have. We were maybe in a denied area of the world, and I only had access to somebody for an hour and a half, and I'm trying to figure out if they're telling the truth. And you can't have a team of interviewers in there. It's yeah, it just becomes too problematic. So you do the best that you can, and then of course you always can look at your success and say, well, how much of this can I corroborate?
Yeah.
Oh, we did find that shoe print on the fence, exactly where he said. I did go to Wienerwald. I did go to Vienna. I did sit in that booth he talked about. And you're right. You can see the bathroom and you can see the entrance from where he said he was sitting. So now you begin to corroborate things and you say, okay, so now I can begin to have greater confidence in what I collected. Because as you and I both well know, just because somebody says something doesn't know
It's
doesn't
true.
it isn't true.
Yeah.
Sounded good.
Yeah.
Really? 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 Yeah.
That's something I also talk a lot about in the corporate world, also with auditors. They often think that what people are saying are actually the facts. And
Yeah.
then I say to Todd, yes, those are facts, but is it the truth? And then what is the truth? Because we can have a very philosophical question about what is the truth. And then I always say, yeah, if I draw a 6 or a 9 on the floor, for the other person it might be a 6, and for you it might be a 9. A completely different reality of those facts,
Yeah.
but nobody is lying.
Yeah, it's perception. You know, you said, well, there was like a 30% drop in attendance. Well, is that accurate? Well, maybe it was only like 12%, but to them it felt like 30%. So, um, yeah, so that gets into the interesting thing.
Yeah.
The other thing that you and I so often talk about is food.
Well, there was actually a question about food, Joe. Let me see what listeners, because there was a very good one. What if you had to help people or your guests at home to
Yeah.
understand your personality and turn that into a recipe? What would you cook for your guests?
Oh, wow. What would I cook? Well, this is one where our good friend Roy could answer this one. He's a famous chef.
Well, the next question was from him, but maybe you first answer this one.
Yeah, in the Netherlands, for your viewers, anything Roy cooks, eat it. um, you know, the term companion, two words, com, with, pan, bread. I think anytime you can get someone to sit down with you and eat with you and share food with you, and I've done it all over the world. I have eaten at some of the best restaurants in Taiwan, New York. I've sat down with a Bedouin tribe in Jordan and eaten goat with them, and the food is the cement, but it's the conviviality. It's this thing I often talk about is likability. Just be
Yeah.
likable. And
So, were you actually deflecting the answer of not coming up with a recipe, or?
well, because I mean, the I used to make arroz con pollo. I used to make paella, but I don't do that anymore. So I do know how to make pies. Three-quarter cups sifted flour with 1/4 cup of shortening and a little pinch of salt, and slice it together, and then just add a lot of apples,
Yeah, yeah,
sugar and cinnamon, and there you have the American version of Apfelstrudel.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That sounds
very
great.
very simple. So I would tender that as my recipe.
Yeah. Yeah, and Roy wanted to know what the seafood. So, what's your favorite seafood? So, I think he did ask this question with intent.
Oh, bless him. Well, I'll tell you, anything he cooks, I still remember that meal he cooked for us. I was just in Valencia in Spain. I had a great time there, and we had mariscos, shrimp, and really any bounty from the sea. I really enjoy. So it's I
Sounds
leave it up.
great.
I
I'm
leave it up
hungry
to
already.
yeah, my doctor always says eat more fish, and we do. We eat it at least 3-4 times a week. So yeah, very enjoyable.
Yeah. And it's all about connecting as well, right?
It's one of the things that I did when I was in Valencia was because I hadn't been to Spain in many years. I was sitting down writing notes every day I was there, and and I've seen it elsewhere. Obviously, I've seen it in Holland. with the Dutch, and that's, taking the time to enjoy life, taking the time to enjoy just sitting around and just talking nonsense, laughing, singing songs, doing silly things, um, not taking everything so serious.
Yeah.
And then the next day you go back to the serious stuff, but taking the time to enjoy life. One of the key traits that they have found, with the longevity studies, whether it's in Japan or in these other blue areas they call, where people live a long time, conviviality, getting along, taking time to enjoy each other's company. Yeah.
And we also talked about perspective, how you look at certain information, how you perceive people as well. And I was also still wondering, talking about interviewer, that how do you make sure that you are not reading the other person, but also continuously checking what you bring into the room?
Mm. So, what we do know that the information goes back and forth, and depending on our ability to, what's called the term neuroception. Some people are better at it than other, but we're constantly assessing and interpreting and evaluating. Certainly, as we get older, not as much as children, which is what makes children so receptive of other children. They don't even pay attention to things like skin color or other things. They just don't pay attention to that. They're all they're concerned with, are we having fun or not? As we get
Mm-hmm.
older, we look at other things, but it's continual. And so when it comes to interviewing, I always remind people it starts outside the theater of the interview and it ends outside the theater interview, but it's always going on inside the theater of interview. Um, the other thing I think that stands out is that I need to always be evaluating where this person is emotionally, but I also need to be evaluating myself and saying, where am I? Am I calming things down?
Mm-hmm.
Am I making things smoother, or am I adding to the tension of it? And so I have to self-check. This happened to me the other day. I was asked by someone I'm mentoring, um, and I was talking to them as I often did, but I found myself tensing up. My answers were becoming shorter, and 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 part of it had to do with that I had asked them to do certain homework, to read certain things, and they hadn't done that. And I had to reflect on the fact that I was tensing up and that was going to affect them, and it
Mm-hmm.
was. And so I had to, you know, as my Cuban father would say, take it easy, calm down, slow
Yeah.
it down. Not everybody reads like you read. Nobody sits there and read. Some people have a life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the introspection during the interview. The other thing I wanted to say, and it's in part related, is that part of your role is to observe. And the tasking order is not just what they say, but when they say it, how they say it, and in reaction to what are the stimuli. Well, some of the stimuli could be, Anne, where were you last night? Well, that's part of it, but the other part of the stimuli is the nonverbals on my part, which may be the way that I intensely looked at you as I asked the question.
Yeah.
You have to be on guard at all times as to the effect you're having on other
Yeah.
people, because in any interview, we have what's called intrusive observation. Intrusive observation is already affecting the experiment, just as in the Heisenberg principle. So you have to be very careful of the effect that you
Yeah.
have in other. And because I'm old, I forgot the other things that you asked.
I think we actually answered that you have to check continuously what you bring into the room as
Oh
well.
yeah,
So yeah, for sure.
your own emotions, or the
Yeah.
emotions that I listen. I remember somebody I was interviewing, and they started to just say nasty things to me, and for some investigators, they have a real hard time with that. And in my mind, I kept saying to myself, "Okay, this is the best that you can do."
Yeah.
You know. I always remember this comedian who uh, who put it this way, and he talks about he dies, and he's confronted by the devil, and the devil tells him what he's going to put him through, and so forth. And then the devil finally says, "So tell me about yourself." And the guy says, "Well, I've been married twice." And the devil says, "Oh, well, you want a job here?" You know, and
Oh, this is
and that's
great.
the way I used to view these guys when they started
Yeah.
calling me names and saying and things. And I
Yeah.
say, "This is all you got?"
Yeah.
I said, "You should have been in the neighborhood where I grew up."
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
said, "This is nothing."
But has it always been like that? Because I remember myself when I started as a probation officer. Well, I think you already read the story about this rapist who was 50 years old and I was 23 or something. And what did I now know about his work, his life, etc.? And I was like, sir, you should not do this. In Dutch, they say foei.
Oi. Yeah,
Like saying it to a dog, right?
yeah, like to a
So
dog. Pfui. Yeah,
fully. And
yeah,
it was my mindset about not understanding his position and not being able to
yeah,
have the same level. So his resistance symptom was actually just jump in. Who are you, girl, to treat me that way? Give me your boss and give me another probation officer, etc.
yeah,
And I actually felt very intimidated until I understood
yeah,
that saying things like this is not working. Stop it right here. This is not working. But you have to practice and you have to test it
yeah.
out because in the beginning, you can be very fearful of
Sure.
experimenting with dealing with such conversations.
Yeah, no, these are things that you learn. I remember at this point, I think I had 6, 7 years in the FBI, so somewhat experienced. And I remember one psychopath in particular, and he was a member of the Machetero terrorist group in Puerto Rico. And I remember the way he looked at me and he talked to me, and I felt my legs uh, get soft. I was, I have no shame in telling people I was intimidated, because hopefully somebody will learn from that.
Exactly.
And I had to take myself away from that. And you question, well, who am I? Am I as tough as I think I am? And I always say there's always someone that's going to put you on what we call tilt. Like those old pinball machines, they had
Mm-hmm.
a button.
Mm-hmm.
If you
Yeah.
push too hard,
Yep.
there's always going to be somebody that will just shake you up because of their coldness, their insensitivity, their pathology.
Yeah.
And you just have to live and learn it. No academy would have prepared me for that, just as no
Yeah.
academy can really prepare you for a
No.
53-year-old rapist who is like, that you can be told they exist, but you you experience it.
Yeah.
The polyvagal matrix goes into effect and you feel your throat tighten, you feel your chest tighten, your heart actually speeds up, your gut tightens, and there's no amount of words that can explain it other than to experience it. So
Yeah, that's all. But I also say with investigative interview training, they want to do a 2 or 3 day training, have all the knowledge, and then do their work job, and then say, okay, now I can do it. But
yeah,
it's about the feeling, like you say, right? You have to go through scenario training. You have to go
yeah,
through all those painful moments to understand what you will be left with if you are emotionally hijacked as well, because then you will learn how to be more productive. To
yeah. You,
Yeah,
you have to experience it. I mean, sometimes with training, you can simulate, bullets going by, firing at close quarters, things like that. But there are some things that just can never be replicated.
I was also wondering if you ever regretted seeing things too clearly, or that there was a negative mental effect to seeing things too clearly, maybe in personal life, for instance, or with clients, or maybe
Yeah,
even with yourself, because you are also very reflective. Yeah.
yeah. Look at my nonverbals. Um, yeah, absolutely. I it's a blessing and it's a curse. You can see things with such clarity and you see it so much faster than other people that you can
Mhm.
act on it quicker and so forth. Does it have a downside? Everything from somebody saying, "Oh, I didn't see that. You must be wrong."
Yeah.
Well, you've seen it dozens of times. You know what that means. After a while, you just give up on trying to explain. I've seen the pain of it. I think I told you the story years ago of being on that cruise and somebody, we were a bunch of couples, and somebody said, "Oh, let's do this again in 6 months." And this woman clutched at her jewelry around her neck and made a fist, and I saw that, nobody else saw it, and, she filed for divorce, I think 6 months, later. And so you see things, especially, abused children, abused, spouses, that is really painful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, it affects me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there is the pain of that, but would I trade it? No, because I've also been able to see things in time that, certainly saved my life, and have been beneficial to others, but, if you use a metaphor, the metaphor of Adam and Eve and the apple was that all of a sudden if they bit the apple, they could see things, they were no longer innocent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that allowed them to be human,
Yeah.
and not in this protected state. So it's a metaphor for that. But I think when as you and I do, where we're constantly observing, we're constantly exchanging ideas about observations. What was the sequence? What was first? Did she look down first? Did she clutch her neck first? Well,
Mm-hmm.
there's sentiment and meaning to that you use that hopefully to help other people around. But it's hard. I mean, you've talked about how painful it is for you.
Yeah, and it like said, it has a certain emotional cost as well. And also, I do also recognize that people can perceive the things you see as even judgmental, right? So, who are you saying that this is the case or that is the case? While in our brain, there was a whole narrative going on already, but you just talk about the
Yeah.
end of the story, the end of the narrative, and not what has been in our head or mind or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't talk about the 6 or 7 behaviors that I saw leading up to that. I only
Exactly.
I only give you the synopsis of it, And I've learned to just sometimes just keep my mouth shut,
Yeah.
especially when I see relationships that may be having trouble. Um, I remember one where every time the wife said something, the man would look at her and then look away and pinch the commissure of his mouth, contempt.
Yeah.
And the research says that, when you see demonstrations of contempt, that it's quite high. It's above 70% that they'll be divorced within 5 years or something
Yeah.
like that. I just kept my mouth shut. I said, this is not going to benefit anybody. And eventually she tired of his behaviors and his
Hmm.
shenanigans and things.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So a
eh,
follow-up question might also be then, when does the responsibility stop, or your sense of the responsibility you might have because you have a certain way of observing, or um,
well, I've had that conversation. Um, in fact, I had that conversation about 30 years ago with a gentleman. He hired me to come and teach at the University of Tampa. So I was still in the FBI, but I was granted permission to teach there once a week. And Phil Quinn, who was both a psychologist, but he had also been a priest in the Catholic Church. And so he saw things with an interesting perspective, and he was in the criminology department, which was fascinating. But his question, I'll never forget it. We were sitting there one time, and the question was, well, at what point do you have a responsibility to tell someone that about something that you know?
yeah.
And and I think we both came to the same conclusion that uh, for the sake of social survival, that there is a line, and that has to do with harm. Is someone going to physically harm you?
Yeah.
But boy, there was a lot of things
Yeah.
that uh,
Yeah.
got in there, such as are they hiding a drinking problem, or are they hiding a drug problem, or are they hiding that they're doing this or that, and
Yeah.
what's your responsibility? And he had an interesting perspective because he was both a psychologist and a priest, and saying, well, where's the greater harm? Do we want to preserve unity and so forth? And I mean, I don't have the answers, but I do know that for me, there was always that fine line. It has to do with life and security and
Yeah.
safety.
Yeah, I think it's good, especially for young interviewers or people who know from themselves that they are very highly alert, and that they have the feeling that they see everything. I recently had a discussion online as well with this young woman who says, "Yeah, I can see everything, I know everything," and then you can ask the questions, but how did you check? And that would be my first question. How do
Yeah.
you know that you know everything? And if so, where stops the responsibility? I think that's something, if you are very highly alert, you should ask yourself often to keep yourself in check as well, I guess.
Well, yeah. I mean, anybody that says they have perfect retention, I would question, because I've known some people who have very good retention, but I would be as skeptical with them as I am with myself, which is, did I really see that? What are the other alternatives? I'll share something with you, which I have long thought about, but I've never really talked about before. And that is that too many people who study body language seek a perfect answer.
Yeah.
In other words, man, I saw lip compression. So what is it? What does it mean? Well, for some people, it means that they're worried, or they're thinking, or
Yeah.
there is any number of things. And as you know, from my classes, I try to simplify it. And I say, does it fit under comfort or discomfort? But I think there's another way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And the other way to look at it is more in line with the evolutionary process. And that is, as we consider this, what is the range of probabilities? Is the range of probabilities that because of what just happened, that this person has a concern, maybe they don't want to talk, they're thinking about it. What is the range of possibilities? And I think I would prefer to have someone say, well, I can give you a range of possibilities than to have someone who says, well, I know exactly
Yeah.
what that means.
I think this is also the way how I read your books, because sometimes you get a lot of skepticism and criticism as well, because we know there is a whole community of people who think that the whole nonverbal spectrum is pseudoscience, etc. And just like with your books, I like to see it as possible scenarios as well. For instance, the whole codex and all the movements there are, but also like you mentioned before with Hermann Ilge and his INSA method. If you are frowning or squinting, it might mean that you are angry. It might mean that you take a lot of responsibility and you want to gain control of a situation.
Yeah.
It might be that you are worried. So I'd like to teach people as well in all those scenarios, not as a certain method as a holy grail, but to accept maybe critical decision making in the interview or in the conversation, to use it as steering information. So that's how I would like to see it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it just makes better sense to just teach it as this is the range of possibilities. That's how evolution works. There's a range of possibilities. When a baby is showing discomfort, no mother is born knowing what exactly is bothering the baby. Do they need warmth? Do they need a hug? Do they need to be burped? Do they need to go to the bathroom? There is a range of possibilities, and that is the only way that we could have possibly evolved, is if we consider a range of possibilities and then adapt to that range of possibilities. Because you're right, in Hermann's case, the person may be just thinking about, well, wait a minute, that doesn't square with what I heard months ago, and they're just trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
And so, putting it within range of possibilities is actually a more elegant way to look at it. I mean, by the way, the criticism of that nonverbals is pseudoscience. What I always say is, you haven't taken the time to read the immense amount of research
Yeah.
that has been done, certainly since the 1980s. I can barely keep up with the articles that are published almost every day, and these are all scientific journals. Yeah, what I would say is take one of my bibliographies, read all 700, 900 articles or books, and then we'll sit down and we'll talk about that.
How would that conversation look like? For instance, when you might be able to have a conversation with people that are very critical or say it pseudoscience, what would you ask those people to have a good conversation about it?
Well, I would say is, well, what do you mean? What's your definition of pseudoscience? Is
Hmm.
it science that you don't agree with?
Yeah.
Uh, because if Dr. Ambati at Harvard did these studies and found that people were making decisions in milliseconds, that's been tested over and over and over again. So please explain to me what you mean by pseudoscience, first of all.
Yeah.
Then I would ask them, well, are you familiar with Dr. Ambati's work? Are you familiar with Dr. Bagun's work? Are you familiar with Dr. Bella DePaulo's work? How about Mark Frank? How about Joe Kulis, University of
Yeah.
Chicago? How about David Givens? I just go down the list
Yeah.
and say, or what about Desmond Morris?
Yeah.
Was all that? Because it now, if they start to say, yeah, well, that's pseudoscience, and I'd say, okay, you know what? There's only so many more breaths that I can take on this planet.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm here to convey. I
Yeah.
simply do not have the time to sit there and argue the inane.
Yeah.
There's so many articles, scientific, solid articles on how people make decisions, what we're persuaded by.
Yeah.
You know, it's fine. I'm
I also had a
taking that Keanu Reeves. I'm doing the Keanu Reeves. I believe whatever you want to believe. What?
Yeah, exactly.
Have a nice day, but I'm not going to be robbed of my oxygen.
No. Well, I did have a good discussion with Abby Moronio as well about it, right? So there is also a lot of political driven reasons to call something pseudoscience, taking certain literature and then argument to that direction, etc. And for some people who are still looking into nonverbals, finding their ways, it can be very difficult to understand what to follow. Is there a certain holy grail? What kind of literature should I read? Because it took us a few years to understand
Yeah.
bits and pieces. So I can imagine still that because of all those criticism, it can be hard for people to steer in the right direction.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with you. I mean, when I started in the 1970s, there was How to Read a Person Like a Book, and then there was um, Darwin's Emotions in Animals and Men, and that was it. Now there's so much more research. One of the biggest problems in nonverbals is the silly notion that psychology owns it.
Yeah,
And so a lot of the critique is really at psychologists,
yeah.
and people forget about anthropology, ethology,
Neuroscience. Yeah,
ethnology. There's so many others that study nonverbals. And I was blessed in that I didn't have anybody dictating to me how to study nonverbals. So my initial introduction to nonverbals was self-taught, because I had to learn the language of that I could rely on, which was I went from Spanish to English, but nonverbals was the primary language. But then when I was at university, I fell in love with anthropology. And so my foundation was Malinowski in the Trobriand Islands. And then later I found out these were Dutch islands that he was studying in Malaysia and so forth.
mm-hmm.
And going to the Pacific Islanders and the study of the Pacific Islanders, and looking at the initial observations of Cook and and the other people that arrived in those islands in the 1600s. I was blessed with that, because it wasn't hammered to me, oh well, this is what psychologists are finding. I was going by the initial observations of these people that actually spend time with these pre-industrial
Yeah,
tribes. And so my perspectives are more as an ethologist, which is in the way that Jane Goodall studied animals by just observing them in situ, not in a lab,
yeah,
not running experiments.
yeah,
Which for some scientists, they said, well, then that's not
yeah,
science.
yeah,
Well, I think there's a lot of people that would say that Jane Goodall's a good scientist.
Yeah, and we are not going to have the discussion considering the time about the difference between lab studies and when you are actually interviewing terrorists, spies, and criminals, because we can do a whole conversation about that. Maybe for a series.
That gets into the silly when I started getting to know some of these psychologists who were doing the research, and they come and tell me that they did the research on college students and that they had never sat with a terrorist or a bomber or a rapist or a serial killer or a pedophile, that they had never sat and smelled them in the same room. And I'm thinking, okay, we're talking different things here.
Language, yeah.
Because when you sit in that room, you see things that you don't ever see. And I'm not taking anything away from research. I love the research. I would love, you put up the book earlier. I would love for scientists to go through all 406 behaviors and demonstrate whether they can repeat those experiments over and over, or if I failed totally. And I would be happy with that. So science doesn't scare me, but as you say, in politics, it does scare a lot of.
I still like to see science and research as a tool to understand certain scenarios like we talked about before. And I think that for me is the best way to teach people others as well. And as a coach, I always say you can only bring others as far as you have been yourself as well. So this is what we try to do, right? Gain knowledge and teach, and gain knowledge and teach, and hopefully a lot of people will.
But absolutely. I mean, consider this. It wasn't till I wrote about the covering of the suprasternal notch that we actually saw it on paper. And I'm thinking, why wasn't this written about 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 30 years ago? And it was because nobody had sat in that room watching how suspects and witnesses, right? Witnesses who had seen a horrible event clutching at their necks. But what if, like you said, what if they brought in the sciences? And what if they had brought in somebody that was an expert in anatomy and physiology and said, well, you have to remember, you have the vagus nerve, which descends bilaterally. Air, oxygen, electricity is going through this area. And then you have an anthropologist come in and say, this is where the animals attack. And we have a natural need to protect this. What if everybody had brought this together, but instead what we see is this division of, well, I do this and you do that. And
Michael was actually quoting, not me or you, I think, or maybe just thinking of something. You can't prevent it until you know how to recognize it. And he said, or maybe that applies to deception, manipulation, emotional shifts, or even escalation. So how can you train yourself to recognize subtle signals or signs before they become a problem?
well, let's Louis Pasteur answered the question. Chance favors the prepared mind. The more you know, the more you can apply it. If I think in some ways that answers why I go so far afield, why I read about neurobiology, why I've studied medical textbooks, because if you understand nerves of the body, then you understand why we touch the nerves. Why do we touch our face so much? Fifth cranial nerve. Why do we go from touching our faces to scratching? Fifth cranial nerve. It's the quickest way to. So having knowledge can only help you. Obviously, having guided knowledge is helpful also. I wish I had somebody guide me through this. I've had to, unfortunately, find it on my own. But chance favors the prepared mind. And the more prepared it is, I would say read everything you can. and
And
go
also,
park it.
I think what I always say is check yourself in the conversation. If you find certain scenarios, then find a way in the conversation to check the emotional state or mindset that someone is in, so that you can still see, okay, this might be my own perception, but something else might be going on in the situation as well.
Well, that's, I mean, you're always spot on. And that is, we may see something indicative of psychological discomfort, but what's the cause behind it? Is it the
Yeah.
question? Is it the timing? Is it too personal? Is it that I don't like you? I remember being polygraphed because I had access to all this special access classified material. I was on the polygraph several times every few years. And one year there was this guy, and I just didn't like him. I just plain didn't like him. That's not covered in any book. I just did not like this guy's attitude. I didn't like the way he shook my hands. I didn't like the way he looked at me. He looked smug, and I was not going to be an easy interview for him. And in the end, he said, "Well, you passed, but there were some issues." And I said, "Well, there were some real issues. Then you would
Yeah.
have passed me, right?" And he didn't like that answer, and I didn't like him. To this day, I don't care. It's like it was one of those days where, I've been working for a long time, been working hard, missed a lot of my daughter's birthday special events. I don't need Mickey Mouse here to tell me uh, what I am or am not.
So
And
he didn't close the question, the interview very well. Then also reflecting about his impact on the interview.
yeah, did I affect the whole thing? Yeah. Did I
Yeah.
intend it? Yeah. Was I frustrated? Mm-hmm. Did I know better? Should I have been more gentle? Probably, but not that day. And I still
No,
remember it.
you will never forget.
Yeah.
Michaela, which you know, ask us, how do you balance intuition with analytical thinking when interpreting behavior in high-stakes situations?
Well, I don't know how he defines intuition. I mean, I'm not even sure I use that term. I use whatever information has been made available to me, and have I studied it
Mhm.
and analyzed it. That's how I operate. I don't go by, I just don't have a definition of intuition. I mean, I have gone in, I remember as a young police officer, I went into this building and I felt scared and I didn't know why. Now, somebody could say, well, that's intuition. Um, Analyzing it now, I can look back on it and say, subconsciously, I picked up on some things. There was a car that was in the wintertime, it was running and there was nobody in it. Not unusual because some people would warm up their car, but it was late at night and near this building. The fact that when I walked into the room, I thought I smelled something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Turns out that vacant rooms late at night retain smells far longer than one where there's a lot of activity. So I would attribute it to what is now called neuroception, and saying I had been picking up on clues.
Yeah.
I was just not paying attention to it. So that would be my
Yeah.
answer.
That also makes me think about the book of Kevin de Becker, right? The Gift of Fear.
Oh,
He
the gift
really
of fear.
explains it very well. And I think it's that gut hunch, but it comes from somewhere. You only learn how to argument and to reflect over it afterwards.
Yeah.
I think that's the way to put it, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, his book was great, but we now know so much more about the vagal nerve and the vagal matrix system and how it innervates all these areas of the body. The fact that we now know that we have neurons in the heart, we have neurons in the stomach, an inordinate amount of neurons in the stomach. And so these are processing information, they're telegraphing information back and forth. So these gut feelings, I've had them, but I think if I had stopped to break down what I had observed, I probably would have said, well, I observed
Yeah.
these things.
Stephanie, last question of followers. What would you consider a suitable code of conduct or code of practice when applying behavioral analysis professionally? Which I found a very good question. It's more about ethics, I guess.
Yeah, well, ethics by definition is that which is befitting others. So let's not complicate ethics.
Yeah.
Ethics is not morality. Morality is different, and law is different. Ethics is that which is befitting of another. What I would say is that your job is to make observations, and they have to be done in context.
Yeah.
But they also have to be in such a way where you are not influencing what you're saying. The example I gave you earlier of the guy that was giving me the polygraph, I know I was influencing him, but I didn't care. I think the ethical thing is to always make the observations and as we said, to look at the range of possibilities where possible to determine what is behind these behaviors. But for instance, the one that I won't cross, the line that I absolutely will not cross is to say, well, I think he's lying.
Yeah.
Even to say that, because there's people out there that say, oh, he's lying. I don't even say, well, I think he's lying. Certainly not based on nonverbals. I mean, I may say, well, he had this reaction to this question. Now the question is why? But I mean, and that's as far as I think you can
You can go.
you can take it ethically. Yeah.
Yeah. If you would whisper one thing to your younger you, Joe, maybe starting at the FBI, what would you tell yourself?
Oh, I, uh, I think. Well, for me, it was very difficult because the bureau came to me. I didn't apply to the bureau, so I felt like I owed them a huge debt of gratitude. Number one, and I was always afraid of failing. And so many times I didn't enjoy myself as much as probably I could have. Everything was always, and it was. I mean, it was serious. We were dealing with serious crimes. Um, I I think if I wish somebody had said, you know, by the time you're in 10 years, that's when you'll really know your stuff. And I think that would have been helpful because to graduate from the academy, you don't know anything really.
No.
First interview, you still don't know that much. You have to experience things over and over, and then you feel comfortable. And it takes about 10 years.
Yeah. And do you still have the feeling sometimes that you are paying a kind of debt or trying to?
Well, especially to this country who took us in as refugees. I mean, sometimes I think, okay, well, have I paid my debt? And I don't look at it that way. I just got a request the other day. Could I help out to teach a law enforcement class nearby. They don't have any money for a budget, and I said, sure, I'll stop by and teach and share my knowledge. So there's always that debt of gratitude, uh, and then always helping anybody out that needs it. But people that stalk me online are asking me always to help them with.
You're showing so much patience, yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
no, I love our conversations.
But this
Uh,
is one of the longest we've had, right, Joe?
yeah,
Normally you
well,
can
we
just
have
do half a minute.
we have shorter ones, but we have many of them because I mean we have talked about everything from the customs of other countries to food to religion to other things in other conversations. But yeah, this is one
Yeah.
of the longest.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, then there is this student. Let's talk about being a student for you. Where do you feel yourself as to being a student still?
Every day. Uh, there is not. I mean, I'll show it to you. Where is it? I think it's over here. There's not a. There's not a week that doesn't go by where I'm writing observations
The
of.
book.
Well, yeah. How many of them? I mean, I stopped counting. In the codex, which someday I've got to put into electronic form because a lot of it is still handwritten.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm always observing things. Why are they doing that? What is this behavior? What could it possibly mean? What are the implications of this behavior? Would we see this in other cultures? Last night I was watching a Korean film specifically for cultural behaviors in the workplace. So I was, yeah, I
Student
never
of life.
stopped. What's that?
Student of life.
Well, yeah, I mean, it keeps me interested.
Yeah.
Um, but people say, well, what are you going to do with that? Well, I don't know. I started collecting things in the 1970s. I didn't know what I was going to do with it.
Yeah.
Um, what that will look like in the end, we shall see. We've talked about that. What am I going to do with all these records of
Yeah.
tens of thousands of
More of these
observations?
kinds of conversations. Hours and hours.
No, nobody wants
No,
to.
no.
No, no. Well, we'll know by how many people
Yeah.
watch this and respond. If we know there's only 12 that actually listen and passed it on, then we know that.
I think people will for sure.
that
Yeah, and me being one of your students, because I still see myself that way as well, always learning because of our conversations. Also, closing the conversation, always wanting to know, what did you think about our conversation today?
Well, let me clarify something because you think you're always learning from me. I mean, you're picking up things from my perspective, but I'm always listening to you because I listen to your perspective because I didn't grow up in Europe. I didn't grow up in the Netherlands. There's always the European perspective, there's the woman's perspective, and so I'm always learning from that. Well, what I've learned from so it goes both ways. I think we're students of each other. I just happen to be a little older. I think from today's interview is the reality that this is a very broad area and that you could spend days talking about a lot of the specifics. And humans are just interesting to me. We're a very, I mean, we're a very interesting species. We are the only species that communicates in as many ways as we do.
Mhm.
No other species has that. and we're also one of the most violent species on ourselves. So we're an interesting species. Forget that, but
Yeah.
I was lucky that I was a good observer. Anyway, I hope
Yeah.
this is enough.
Yeah, for sure. The last question is for feedback for me, like you have seen in all my podcasts as well. What feedback would you have for me? How can I improve as someone who has conversations?
That one's easy. I wouldn't change anything. You ask good questions. You're always prepared. You're always, you're one of the most intelligent people that I get to talk to. So you ask profound questions, and they come from a deep place. So I wouldn't change any of that. Yeah, I sorry, I don't have much to
That's a Dutch nonverbal. Damn.
so
Us
don't
being a perfectionist still.
so
How
don't
can it be? How can it
just
be?
just don't change don't change anything. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Joe, because I always like to talk with you and have good conversations. And also being in the capacity to also show people bits and pieces of how we converse with each other, and hopefully people can learn from that as well, because this was actually the goal, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Letting
mean
other people
it was
see.
a conversation. It's how you and I talk to each other. Yeah. But,
Yeah.
2 hours in one day
Yeah.
instead of
That's a
8
lot. Yeah.
instead of 8 minutes. Anyway, it's
Yeah.
always good to talk to you, Anne. You're the future,
Well, thank you. For you, where can people find you? Get more information about you.
You can go to joenavarro.net or just type in my name, and usually my books and videos and things show up. So
I'll put in some links in the comments below. And then
yeah,
we have to say you have to like and subscribe,
yeah,
people.
uh, ring the bell,
Ring the bell,
subscribe,
all sort of things.
but
I will
more
never get
importantly,
used to it.
subscribe to Ann Gaiser's channel and watch all her material.
Thank you, Joe. And let's app each other when we have another minute to talk.